I actually wasn't going to do a video about Prot Warrior because I generally feel like its current state on alpha is unfinished. It feels like they had been addressing some more Fury and Arms Warrior changes, especially in regard to the class tree, and some of the changes that they made to protection or that protection was essentially affected by seems just like incomplete. And in this video, I'm going to talk about some things I might have missed in previous videos, specifically the video that I put out a couple days ago talking about all of my favorite tank changes that are coming. I was a little bit short when it came to the Protection Warrior specifically, just because I felt like most of the changes they had were either bugs, they were nerfs in a lot of senses, or just simply overlooked. And while I think a lot of the tank changes going forward are looking relatively optimistic, I think Protection Warrior is falling short, and I actually think that in its current state, it's pretty terrible. So let's kind of talk through everything that is changing. So the first thing you'll notice is that the class tree has taken a pretty heavy shift in its, I guess, overall structure, especially as you get into the later half of the tree. Things like Avatar have been removed, Thunderous Roar, as well as both of those abilities correlating capstones. So, the shorter reduction, the improved unstoppable, like immovable object, unstoppable floors, those things were removed. The capstones for Champion Spear, they've kind of been baked into the ability. Actually, not really, but this ability has been improved that some of you happen to actually point out. So, there are some better changes, I think, specifically that Warrior's now bringing. I think, for example, Intimidating Shout having a reduced, or I guess increased target cap, as well as a reduced cooldown through abilities like Battlefield Commander is generally good. I don't like that you kind of have to play through either CC if you do want access to something like Double Time. So if you didn't want to play CC, let's say in Raid, which maybe this doesn't actually affect anyone, you would actually just not be able to take Double Time. You would only ever really take this in Mythic Plus, because in Raid you probably don't need an AoE fear removal, a slow, or a fear, I guess depending on the raid fight realistically. But having to pat through either of these to get to Double Time does feel generally bad to me. I guess in practice it's probably okay to not have a bunch of an extra charge in raid. So this change isn't terrible. It's just, again, in context of available pathing, you want to get down to the left-hand side of the tree, but you don't really want to take CC, so it's kind of clunky. So one of the more interesting changes to me is they actually made Last Stand a passive. And this is where it gets into where I think Protection Warrior feels unfinished. So currently Last Stand is when your health is brought below 20%, you marshal your inner strength to increase your max health by 30% for 15 seconds and instantly heal yourself for that amount. So the problem with this talent being a passive and also being on a 4-minute cooldown is currently Warriors on live can play something like Bolster, which reduces it from a 3 to a 2-minute CD and gives you shield block. Now, I've talked about this in a previous video, but basically I think this is really weird because while you are getting healed for 30% of your max health as well as the health increase, you don't necessarily care for the shield block, nor will play around forcing yourself to proc this when you get this low. What's also kind of awkward about this is it doesn't pair well with Battled Scar Veteran, because Battled Scar Veteran is when you are brought below 30% health, you take 80% less damage for 8 seconds, and the healing you receive is increased by 100%. Now, generally, what ends up happening, at least in Mythic Plus in my experience, especially when you start getting into higher level keys, is if you happen to get brought below 30% health, that's the indicator to press Last Stand or Final Stand. I guess in this case it's called Last Stand. Thinking of, I've Prop Paladin on the brain. So basically, they paired really well together. Now, when you hit 30% health, you're taking 80% less damage. So the amount of damage you'd have to take to then proc the 20 is pretty wild. So now you can argue maybe it's like, well, now you have kind of like 2 cheat deaths, but I believe the backup, which would be Last Stand in this case, since it has a lower health threshold and a longer cooldown, is objectively worse than Battled Scar Veteran is. Battle Scar Veteran gives you agency, like with things like Impending Victory, Original, or how Last Stand currently works on live servers, as well as things like or external healing from like your healer, for example, or health potions, stuff like that. So these, I feel like it's falling short. And again, coming back to the whole incomplete thing, I don't think, or maybe I think in the future, they plan on maybe reworking or removing Bolster entirely and replacing it with something else. I think Last Stand maybe shouldn't be part of the class tree and should be either, it's fine, if it is a class tree talent, but I think it should only be a class talent for maybe Arms and Fury, and maybe for Warrior, it can still be an on-use somehow. I don't know if that's going to be the play, but That's why I'm kind of arguing that maybe Warrior feels incomplete. Something that I think a lot of people are skipping over is that anger management has been nerfed. It only lowers the cooldown on Avatar and no longer reduces the cooldown on Shield Wall. The other problem is that it's now every 20 rage that you spend instead of every 10. So if we pull up Wowhead, we go to the talent calculator, go down to Warrior Protection, let's just select Colossus. This is the current tree that we have on live. So anger management is currently in our Spec tree, not our class tree, where Avatar is in our class tree, not our Spec tree, so they are getting flipped. And anger management was every 10 rage you spend versus every 20 that we are now seeing on Alpha. So you're going to have less uptime on Avatar. You're not going to benefit from cooldown reduction on Shield Wall, making you relatively weaker. You lost access to not only Last Stand as an on-use, but also the bolster talent, which would then obviously increase or bolster Last Stand's ability, defensive ability and healing, and throughput in a key. So all of these kind of paired together, I feel like make Warrior just objectively worse. Another thing that I think a lot of people are skimming over is the fact that we are losing access to two very important talents for the Protection Warrior. We're removing Immovable Object and Unstoppable Force as a choice node from Avatar. So generally, and this has been true, I would say, since roughly BFA, that when you pop Avatar, it changes how your class interacts with its kits. It increases the potency of your Thunderclap, how often you're able to do it. It has an impactful feeling in combat when you hit Avatar. You actually feel like an Avatar. Without these talents, without the Shield Wall proc that we saw very common in Season 2 when we were playing Colossus, and without the reduced Thunderclap cooldown when playing something like Mountain Thane, especially in Season 3 of The War Within, when you go into combat here and you pop Avatar, Thunderclap, your rotation feels stagnant sometimes, where you Thunderclap and now you're sitting here with like really nothing to hit. So the class feels so much slower with this cooldown. Another reason why I would argue that if this is the change that Blizzard plans on keeping, it's a terrible design choice. Or you can make the argument, or the more positive argument that I'd like to look at, or justification, is that the class is incomplete and they just haven't really come to Warrior yet, especially because we don't have the Apex talents. Obviously, we don't have our hero talents implemented yet. So this change could boast well for maybe Avatar. Maybe that's where they rework some of the stuff through Colossus and Thane. We just don't know yet. So in its current state, I think Prot Warrior is probably the worst off of all the tanks. We can also talk about Champion Spear really quick. As some players have pointed out, and something that I did not mention in my last video, is that they have reworked this. It is now an ability that you can throw down and it will mass grip mobs in. So the problem for me personally is that it's not a true mass grip. It's either really buggy, or if it's working as intended, it's just not that great of an ability, I think, in my opinion. So let's fly down here. The main reason I'm going to come down here is because I want a couple more mobs to hit. Oops. Maybe I should try dismounting. That is a long charge. So if I'm over here and then I decide to throw my spear down, it's not really gripping in the mobs. It's just tethering them to this location, but it's not really gripping them back in either. So I don't know if this is, again, like it's just kind of bugged. Even if they're on the outskirt of the circle, they seem not to be getting necessarily gripped. They're just getting chained and rooted. So you can, in a theoretical argument, say this change, if it is working like how we would picture it to work, being like more of a mass grip, I think it's amazing. But I cannot currently replicate some of the footage that I've seen, or the grip. They have to be on like the very, very edge of the circle, which I just don't think is good gameplay. So Protection Warrior, so far, feels to me fairly lackluster. Now, as for the tree itself, I want to fly back to Dornogal to talk about a few things in the actual Spec tree that have changed. We actually didn't see much. If you remember, or for maybe people who don't play Warrior, this class tree got fairly heavily reworked going into 11.2 and has been well received. And I think that Blizzard doesn't really need to change much up because of how good it actually is. But there are a few changes that I'm a little sad about. So first off, Fueled by Violence was basically cut in half, but now it's a node you can take alongside Brutal Vitality. I think this is a fine change. It adds a little bit more self-sustain to the warrior, a little bit more leech healing, while also keeping Ignore Pain as like a potent button that you can actually hit. So Brutal Vitality adds the damage to your Ignore Pain, where I can do this all day as a new talent, but it's not yet implemented, where all of your, or I shouldn't say all, 6% of your block damage is added to ignore pain. I don't know what's going to be better. I can imagine a world where your damage is going to eventually cap, but the amount of damage you can actually block is not. So I can do this all day might be better in like high keys, where Brutal Vitality might just be good across the board. It also might depend on dungeon design. If there's a lot of mobs you can actually hit, your damage will scale better than the amount of damage you can actually block. So there's an argument there. I do think that Bolster and Tough as Nails don't really have a spot in this tree anymore. I think Bolster needs to be reworked, or Last Stand needs to be brought here where it's an on-use instead of a passive, but will automatically proc if you are brought low, something along those lines. That also gives shield block, etc. Because of the nerf to anger management, shield wall is objectively worse as well. While you can reduce it from a 3 to a 2-minute cooldown with Defender's Aegis and still have basically an additional charge, that's it. Like, once you use shield wall, it's a 2-minute cooldown. This is now on cooldown for 2 minutes. I still have an additional charge, but there's no way to really farm it back, which again feels bad. It's not like shield wall had a crazy high uptime, but it was up enough, and it was really one of your only larger defensives outside of, you can make an argument for like Spell Reflect, but shield wall is really the only defensive of the protection warrior in its current state. Last Stand is a fine heal, but it's nothing that you're really relying on, and Battle Scarred Veteran is more of like a fallback, like, oh shit, I got too low, so I'm going to slam a health pot, I'm going to slam Last Stand to heal myself. The class to me feels kind of rough. Indomitable had been nerfed obviously a long time ago. It feels unplayable in a lot of cases. A lot of the execute damage is really cool that they have added, except it's worth also noting that they have removed the heavy right hand, or whatever it's called, or red right hand. So it's being replaced by deep wounds. So actually when you execute, it's going to apply a dots. I don't really enjoy dot gameplay as Colossus, or I should say as Warrior. I don't care to like execute. I guess it is nice because it adds more damage to your execute, but I just think it's being added in kind of a weird way. And then the last thing that's kind of odd to me is that they're making Revenge, which I think this is a better change because Slam was in the kit still, but basically Revenge now replaces Slam, but it only hits 3 total targets, and you now have to take Sweeping Revenge for it to actually be an AoE, where currently on live servers, it's just an AoE that sweeps in an arc. So they're making the talent more complicated than it needs to be, I think. Which I just think is a weird change. It's like they didn't know what to put in the tree, so this is what they're doing. I know I seem super down on Protection Warrior by the way I'm expressing some of my feelings here. I think it's more or less incomplete. I'm sure that Blizzard is going to make some adequate changes. I think they're more focused on other classes. This is also a class that recently got a rework. I think they're getting some tertiary effects from the Arms and kind of Fury changes that is affecting them in a way that they're going to worry about later. The last thing I want to talk about is like a slight bug, which I think is just hysterical. I hope they fix this. But currently, and I can't figure out why, but Thunder Blast, when playing Mountain Thane, costs Rage, which is ridiculous. So it's really hurting our Rage economy, so we can't adequately test what our Rage is going to look like, as well as some of our different uptime without playing Colossus. So if I charge in here and hit Avatar to proc this, you're going to notice my Rage is actually going to go down whenever I use Thunder Blast, which again is just really funny. So here I'm just hitting Thunder Blast and my Rage is going down. I don't know why. There's nothing in the kit that says it costs energy. If you hover over the tooltip, it says it costs 30 Rage, even though when you have it just as Thunderclap, it's instant and free. I don't know where this is coming from exactly. I've tried changing around these talents, or not, I guess some of the choice nodes, but basically nothing in this tree is saying that Thunderclap or Thunder Blast now costs Rage that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, and I'm running some weird talent that's causing it, let me know. I think it's doing something weird where when it's applying the rend, it's like charging as if you're casting rend, or something weird, I'm sure. But yeah, Warrior is not in a good state right now. To me, again, like I've said before, it feels more incomplete than just terrible changes. Now, if it went live like this, let's say we were in late beta, I would have a lot of concerns about protection, but there's a lot of things we still don't know. We don't know Apex talents. We don't know the additional hero talent nodes here, as well as we have 3 more points in our spec tree to use, or our class tree, and 4 more points in our spec tree. So those are my overall thoughts about Warrior. I'm optimistic they're going to improve it. Not working currently on alpha. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this little breakdown. Let me know what you'd like to see next. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.